Dr. Michael Tobias, who is a very busy and active neurosurgeon in pediatrics in the Bisney group of whom you just heard from Tony. So I'd like to turn over to Dr. Tobias for a few minutes, just to talk a little bit about life, work, and the craziness of having to leave here and go cover at the hospital, right?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Tobias.
So I guess good afternoon, everybody. Who are the residents that are here? Okay, okay. And what kind of residents? What residents? Neurosurgery. Okay, at Cornell, I heard, right? Okay. Neurology. Okay, great. So I'll just tell you a little bit about just sort of how I got to my current job, which has been my only job since fellowship. I did my residency at Einstein, then did my fellowship at St. Jude's in Memphis. Although I love St. Jude's, I realized that I definitely wanted to be in New York and come back home, basically. So I would say as residents, there's three things you sort of have to worry about in picking a job. One is location, and be honest with yourself. If you want to live in a certain place, a part of the country, don't pretend, your residency or your fellowship, you can compromise that because it has a finite time. Your job, hopefully, will be your job. So I would definitely recommend being honest with yourself, and if you want to be in a certain region of the country, look for jobs in that region of the country. The second thing is what kind of job are you going to have? Academic, pseudo-academic, completely private? Do you want to teach residents? Do you want to have fellows? What's most important to you? And that also, be honest with yourself. I mean, if you will only be happy if you're a truly academic doctor, then make sure that that's the jobs you're looking for. And you may not know, and that's part of what going to something like this is good for, is that you start to meet different kinds of doctors and talk to people and see what you would like and what you wouldn't like. And then the third thing, which no one tells you, it's just probably the most important thing, the people that you work with. If you don't like the people you work with, your job is horrible. And you work way too hard, and you've done too much. And the nice thing is, as a physician, you actually can pick kind of your job. And you want to work with people that you like working with. And it's almost like, who you marry. Think about if you don't like who you're married to. That's bad. So if you don't, and you spend just as much time, if not more, with the people you work with than the people you're married to. So I can't emphasize enough, and I'll be honest with you, I got sort of lucky in the sense I wanted to come back to New York. This was sort of the best job for me. I met my partner, Dr. Mohan, who's another pediatric neurosurgeon. We started here, right out of fellowship, both of us. And it's the only job I've had. I've been here for over 10 years now. I think I got very lucky in that it worked out. So the other thing is this whole idea of work-life balance. And depending on what field you choose, you didn't choose well already because you're in neurosurgery. So you're going to work a lot, but you can. There are people that work harder and less hard. Neurology, same thing. To be honest with you, if you're on stroke call, you're going to be working really hard too. So just be honest with yourself and your significant other, if you have one, and just realize, do I want to be on call every night, every other night, every fourth night? There are different jobs, and you can control that. But the important thing is sort of deciding that ahead of time, not getting to the job and say, I'll figure it out when I get there, because that tends to not work out. And, when you pick a job, you don't necessarily, you may say, well, gee, maybe I'll be there for only a little while, then I'll go somewhere else. And you can do that, and you can change jobs. When a great opportunity comes along, you may go ahead and change jobs to something else. But I'll be honest with you, the people that jump around from job to job, it's very disruptive to your family, to yourself, to also, to make a name for yourself in an institution takes a little bit of time. And medicine's changed a lot in that sense, so I definitely would recommend it. It's nice to stay in a job for a while if you can. And unless you take care of those three things that I mentioned, where you want to be, the kind of job you want to be in, and you like the people you work with, you're not going to stay there long, or you're going to just be miserable. But if you do that right, then you can stay in a place for a while. Then you'll be much happier. There's no perfect job, but I will tell you that I get up every morning and I'm looking forward to going to work. Looking forward to seeing the people at work and do my job. and I'm relatively happy most of the time. And that's kind of what you want to shoot for. All the business side of things, that is a whole other thing. One other thing I would mention that I did not do at all, but I definitely would recommend. When I started, and you probably heard a bunch of statistics from Tony, I assume, but in 2008, when I finished fellowship, I think 2/3 of physicians were in their own practices. Now it's 1/3, and it's 10 years later. So the idea, if you're looking at a job where, you're this little tiny private practice, but it's been great, it's going to be great. It might not be great 5 or 10 years from now. And you guys have, you're looking at the horizon of the next 30 years. I would steer away from that. You want to be in an established, you have to worry about the infrastructure, the quality and cost management. These things, it's almost like, it's weird. As a physician, there's this sort of idea that it's almost like, it's almost as if it's like sinful, or somehow you shouldn't be worried about the business medicine. You should only be taking care of your patients. And I'll be honest with you, I felt that way. I knew nothing. I didn't know what an ACO was. I didn't know what an MSO was. I didn't know anything. And I tried to stay away from that, almost as if it was like, a doctor shouldn't be worrying about money or those types of things. But to be ignorant of it and not to know, go online, look, read articles, figure out what these things are, have an idea, because people are going to be talking to you, and if you don't know what they're talking about, it's hard to make an informed decision. That's just a very simple little thing about what I do. As far as work balance, you're going to work a lot as a physician, I think, no matter what you do, and you'll enjoy it. The nice thing, you compare yourselves, no offense to other people in the audience, but I have friends who are in finance and stuff. It's not that they don't enjoy their job, but their enjoyment is a little different than, I think, as a physician. As a physician, you really, you have this direct. It's like a teacher a little bit. Also, you have this direct helping of the patient and their families, and they will tell you that they really appreciate it, and you can't help but put you in a good mood, and be very fulfilling. So therefore, I think even though we have a tendency to work more than sort of a lot of folk, it's worth it, and you to enjoy what you do is pretty. Consider yourself pretty lucky. Do you guys have any questions? I mean, I'd rather answer questions than just tell you about myself. And yeah, sure.
We spoke a lot this morning about kind of a hospital employment versus private practice setting. I know you've only been kind of mostly in the private practice, but have you found the financial or the administrative aspect of being in a private practice detrimental to the fact that it would make you want to leave,
Oh, you're saying is the burden?
Is it so yeah. Is it such a burden, or is it so overwhelming that it really takes over, and that you guys, would think about, or that you would think about going to a hospital or whatever?
Right. I will say that I never had any intention of being in the situation I'm in right now. I thought I'd go work for a hospital, be part of some neurosurgery department, and that's what I was going to do. And actually, that is kind of the job I thought I signed up for. I'm answering your question in a long way, but give me a second. So when I joined, we were sort of, we were the official practice of the hospital. I joined Dr. Morali, who was the chairman. There were a few other, there was a spine surgeon, a functional person, and there were now 2 peds people. It was basically 5 of us. That was the department. And then there was an evolution where they hired some people. The hospital hired somebody, and we had this opportunity to join. So we were sort of a hybrid, kind of an academic. I've been teaching residents from day one. We were sort of a hybrid of an academic and private practice model, where we build and collected in the private practice, but we were really part of the hospital. We got also support from the hospital in a variety of ways. And then we had there was a fork in the road where we could either join the hospital, or we could join the private group and join this very large neurosurgery group, which is now on the order of about 20 physicians. It's a very large practice, one of the larger neurosurgery practices in the country. And we decided to do that, but stayed very academic. Now, these jobs do exist where you're sort of still teaching residents and academic, but you're part of your own group. Now, as far as in a large group, but still as a financially responsible actor and having to worry about the stuff that you're alluding to, just like you have to have people that you work with that you like, you also need people like Tony and a lot of other administrative people, not that you like, but that you trust. And I think we were very fortunate in that the private practice really had established all of those administrative people who were there to sort of run our practice. So I don't spend that much time worrying. We have practice meetings once a month. We have a big financial meeting at the end of the year, and then there's the day-to-day maintenance. But it's not that onerous actually, and I wouldn't be interested, because I do still spend most of my time taking care of my patients, teaching the residents, teaching the medical students, and doing that stuff. I don't think I'd be interested in a job where I'm so involved with the business aspect. And if that's a job you might be interested in at some point in your career, you probably need to be less clinically responsible. You cut back on your clinical responsibility. I think that otherwise, if you want to run the whole practice, teach residents, be a busy surgeon or a clinician, that's when you're going to have a problem. You got to be honest with yourself and realize that there's only so many hours in a day, and I think most people would rather be good at only certain things rather than trying to do everything, and be mediocre at it. Get you.
My question is, you mentioned like the finding out the interaction of the people that you will work with. How exactly do you do that? I mean, I've heard people say, find out the last guy who left or girl who left and ask them, about the practice, and that's how you get the most, or at least not the most honest, because they might have left for a reason, but you can have an uncolored conversation about aspects of the practice. But how would you recommend finding out about a practice? Who you work with?
Yeah, it's not that sophisticated. I understand what you're getting at, but what you're talking about is right in the sense that, who is left, who has been hired, what has happened, not unlike residency, because residency, although it's not that long, 7 years, that's a long time. I would say that, again, talking to sort of, it's the rumor mill, but talking to the people that are there, also seeing how much turnover there's been. I like a place where there's not a ton of turnover, where there's people coming and going constantly, there's a lack of stability, and again, there's probably a reason. They're probably not getting along that well. I think that spending time with the practice, like, those good, when you go to those dinners for the residency dinners and stuff, I remember I'd visit certain residencies and I just got along with people, and I'd visit certain other residencies and be like, I don't really fit here. Like, this doesn't feel like home. I would trust those instincts. And you're right, at some point it's a leap of faith. You can't work there for a month and figure it out. But you may actually even know, sometimes there'll be a job where you know one person, or you know somebody who knows people very well there. And I would spend a lot of time talking to those people. And also even the hospital itself. I'll tell you something else, something I would never think of, but whether you're joining a hospital or a large doctor group, look them up. How do they rank against other hospitals? What's the IT department like? What's the quality like? What's the, I would never have worried about those things before, but those things really matter. If you work at a dysfunctional hospital, and that has nothing to do with your practice. As a physician, working there is very hard. I primarily work at the Children's Hospital doing pediatric neurosurgery, but I do work at other hospitals, and I can tell you, and also I get transfers from other hospitals. Boy, that affects your life. It's kind of like, where you practice is the house you're living in, and if there's bad IT, bad quality, if there's going to be complications because the instruments weren't available, or because they weren't clean, or because the nursing's not available, or the anesthesiologist isn't there, you don't have a good anesthesiologist, et cetera, that all affects you very directly. And so the more people, I think, to answer, again, long-winded way of answering your question, but the more people you talk to, the more information you get. Believe the information you get. Don't be like, well, this is the job I wanted, and therefore that stuff can't be that bad. Well, it might be bad. Or, it might be good. And I think you have to rely on that information. Yeah?
When you talk about, trusting the administrators in your, or any practice, I mean, what kind of, how do they build that trust? Like in your monthly, management meetings, what kind of reports are being generated from a financial practice management system? I mean, how do they get that trust?
Sure. Part of it is a lot of the people that were in the practice that we joined, and their administration really took over our administration. So it was really their infrastructure that we became a part of. I knew them already for over a long period of time, and that helped a lot. But again, you're getting to a good point. As a physician, you don't want to pay attention to numbers and all these other things. I only want to take care of my patients. I think that that's naive at this point, and things have just changed in medicine. So you have to pay attention. You show up to those meetings, and not only do you pay attention, but you ask for transparency, and you look into these things. And when things don't make sense, you say, look, we have to have a meeting, and you make phone calls, and you have that sort of upkeep, that constant interaction with those people. You have to look at numbers, and you have to look at data. There, again, things like, why are we getting patients from here? Why are we not getting patients from here? Things like that. Why is this insurance carrier responsive and this one's not? If you're not willing to pay attention to that stuff, you're just putting your head in the sand and you're hoping it's going to work out. And I think a lot of practices have failed because of that. Because what they have is you have a bunch of doctors, they trust this one person to run everything, and then they decide, they'll take care of it, and they, again, don't want to pay attention to that stuff. It's upkeep like anything else. It has to be part of your routine that you're constantly paying attention to it. And when it's working out and things are fine, then things are fine. If things aren't working out, then you have to change it. And you hear these stories all the time, by the way. The practices, at least, for example, in our hospital, a lot of the practices joined the hospital because they were failing. They basically they could not survive, couldn't pay the bills, their reimbursements went down, people were leaving their practices, they couldn't run the practices, and then they were sort of forced to join the hospital. That's actually how, in our hospital, for example, that's how it started. And then, of course, there's a large push for all hospitals to have their own groups, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And also, the idea of being a small practice and not looking at quality and not having data and it's just old-fashioned. It's like saying, I'm not going to have a computer. I'm not going to use the internet. It just doesn't exist. You have to do all those things. Anything else? Yeah.
Just real quick, working with clients like that, a lot of doctors, where do you see the practice going within 15, 20 years? Because I've had about 20 or 30 mid-sized practices being gobbled up by like Atlantic Health or all these, so where do you see that? And is it going to affect the quality of healthcare?
Okay, it's interesting. That's a very big question. I don't even know if I'm smart enough or qualified enough to answer that question.
But it's that dynamic, and I can tell you that practices, at least 5 or 6 per year that we're seeing that are being gobbled up by these big industries.
Look, fundamentally, I think that what all doctors want, and I think everybody wants, they want better health care, right? You want to provide better care to your patients. That's really my goal. I don't want to run the best practice. I want to have a really good practice so I can take really good care of my patients. But they do go hand in hand. So again, you can think you're doing a great job as a physician, but the truth is if you don't know what percentage of shunt infections you have relative to the rest of the country, well, then you have no idea what you're doing. If you don't know, how you do versus other people without getting data and quality and all those things, then you're just winging it and assuming you're doing a good job. I think the trend is definitely to bigger. Now, one thing, and again, I said the most important thing, this is another really important thing that drives me crazy. The reason that doctors have so little say in today's healthcare about what happens, and that I would argue is just true. I mean, we have very little say in many aspects of medicine, is because doctors, again, have this, I'm not part of a union, which I'm not saying doctors should unionize, But doctors have this, they're sort of these lone wolves, right? I'm taking care of my patients, I don't deal with anything else, no one can bias me. But until physicians can actually work together, and not in a silo, I mean, the truth is, I think we need business people, we need scientists, we need all kinds of other people to help us provide good care in a very complicated medical system. But if doctors can't work together and at least lobby for that part of of patient care, I mean, it's been shown that the bigger the group, the costs are actually worse, the care is worse, right? Because if you really know your patient, you don't necessarily send them to the emergency room. Maybe, you know what, actually I don't need to send them to the emergency room, I know what's going on with them. But if you're in this big, group where basically, no offense, but some business person who just got out of business school is going to tell you how to manage your practice, and they will. Because let's be clear, if doctors don't have a big voice, if you're like 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 15 people, and you're in some huge group of hundreds of physicians, no one cares what you have to say. You don't count. You're talking in thousands and tens of thousands, and they're talking in millions, hundreds of millions, and billions. I mean, hospitals have billion-dollar budgets. Doctors don't do anything in billions. They don't really do things in millions if you think about it, right? I mean, you take care of you do 200 surgeries a year. You see 400 or 500 patients. You're a blip on the screen. So unless you really matter, so I don't mind the idea of joining other groups, and I think I do want to become bigger because I think you have to. But if you don't do it in the right way, where physicians, or at least, again, you're at the table. There's an old saying, right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If you're not sort of thinking about these things in an administrative way, in a business way, but then also taking into account taking care of patients, I think patients will suffer, and also the doctors will suffer. You won't be providing care in the way, because it seems just backwards, right? Why should people who aren't taking care of patients decide how patients should get taken care of? But there's no question that this train is going that way. It's everything bigger. I would stay away from a small practice, and I think I would keep my mind open to joining bigger groups as long as you do it in the right way.
So that question,
Yeah.
What qualifies as a big neurosurgical practice? Is it greater than 15 people? Is it?
Oh yeah, that's big. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of an interesting question. So for I don't even know the most current stats. Things have changed a lot. I don't know of a lot. Like, I know at Semmes Murphy in Memphis, they're also a private academic group. One of our residents actually joined there a few years ago, and they're about in the order of low 20s. But I think even we're like 17 neurosurgeons, including 2 orthopedic spine surgeons, some physiatrists, and a plastic surgeon. But I think so certainly yes. If you're in the sort of 20, if you're neurosurgeons, it's a lot, because there's just not that many neurosurgeons. That's just the way it is. Obviously, there's a lot more neurologists, a lot more cardiologists, et cetera. But I think more than that, I think all surgeons working together, and again, it's for the right reasons. It's so you have a voice. The doctors, in the old day, 30, 40 years ago, doctors were the only voice, right? Everyone listened to the doctors, and I think that was probably bad too, because there's a lot of stuff doctors don't know how to do well, like, management and all kinds of, and finance. We need all of those other people to help us, because we didn't go to school for that, and we don't know how to do that. But by the same token, the pendulum has swung so far to the other way that the doctors, literally, no one cares what we have to say. And that's insane. Like, I mean, I'll have situations where, like, some policy will come down. I'm in the OR, and there's a policy. And I say, where was this policy? Like, you can't do this anymore. I'm like, well, why? Or they got rid of this, or they added this. A new device came, a new Bovie cautery, a new this, a new that. And you're like, where'd this come from? And they're like, well, there was a meeting. And I'm like, okay. And I knew nothing about it. I mean, for example, there's a Bovie they just started. They started a few fires with the new Bovie, and then they got rid of that new Bovie, and they went back to the old Bovie. And that's a real story. I'm not making that up. That happened like within the last few months in my hospital. No doctor knew about that. Maybe one doctor who doesn't take care of patients was there, but none of the doctors who take care of patients knew about it. And I think unless doctors sort of work together and are at the table and are willing to spend a significant amount of their time worrying about these issues, part of a big group, part of a team, which is not what you were sort of is in your gut of what the right thing to do is as a physician. If you don't do that, you're a blacksmith. You know, you're raising horses when there's cars, or you're investing in coal. I don't have to be political here, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not the wave of the future. So, but yeah, certainly 15 neurosurgeons or 20, that's a big group, absolutely, and they will have a voice, because that's a whole group of neurosurgeons covering a bunch of hospitals. They matter. Anything else? All right, thanks very much.
Thanks so much.